Hello, I am Dr. Hormoz Ebrahimnedjad, lecturer in history at the University of Southampton. I'm going to talk to you about women's situation and the development of gender relations under the clerical regime in Iran in the last 42 years. Before I start, I would like to distinguish between the 1979 revolution and Islamic revolution that are often taken as one and the same, while they are different. The February 1979 revolution was against the Shah, and the purpose was to overthrow the Pahlavi regime. That revolution was initiated by the university students and mainly the secular opposition to the Shah. The Islamic revolution, on the other hand, started by the clerics once they established their power following the February Revolution in 1979. The Islamic revolution is, according to the cleric, an ongoing process, and it will continue, according to the Shiite cleric dominant in Iran, until the return of the hidden imam that, according to Shia tradition, this imam, that was the 12th imam or apostle, went into occultation in around 874. He would return, according to the Shiite tradition, one day. In the Sunni tradition, the other branch of Islam, also Mahdi does exist, but according to the Sunni tradition, Mahdi has not been born, while in the Shiite tradition he was born, and he went into occultation at the age of 6 or 7 years. During the anti-Shah revolution that had begun in 1978, women largely took part in both universities and street demonstrations. In those demonstrations, both veiled and unveiled, or religious and non-religious women, took part. We are not at the stage where women were divided between secular and religious, or in other words, between Islamic and non-Islamic women. Under the Shah, there were women who followed the traditional chador or veil and those who did not, even though they remained Muslim in faith. During the revolution, these two groups were united against the Shah, but after the cleric took power, they broke this union by imposing veil as compulsory dress for women. In fact, the clerics did exactly the opposite of what Reza Shah has done, the founder of the Pahlavi dynasty, by trying to force women to unveil. Although he could not enforce this rule for a long time because the resistance of the traditional society. The clerics who took power revenged the policy of Reza Shah by forcing women to veil. As women were allowed to unveil for nearly 60 years under the Pahlavi regime, a kind of Western dress code was gradually entrenched in society. That is why when Ayatollah Khomeini was still in exile in Paris, he claimed that women would not be forced to wear chador because he thought that he would discourage them to take part in the anti-Shah demonstrations that for him was the most important at that moment. However, once he established his power, Khomeini imposed veil on women, not only in the offices and workplaces, but also in the streets. If Reza Shah did not succeed to unveil all women and implement his rule permanently, the clerics succeeded to veil them all and in a permanent way. This task for the clerics was quite easy, because the majority of society remained fundamentally traditional despite the modernization under the Pahlavi regime, and could consent with the forced wailing. It was at this stage that women who had supported initially the revolution began to oppose the clerical establishment, and by extension they turned against the revolution itself, but it was too late to stop it. There was nevertheless a fundamental change that happened in the life of traditional women in Iran through and after the 1979 revolution. Khomeini invited all women to rise against the Shah in order that they collaborate with their male parents and partners in the revolution. As a religious authority, traditional and conservative women responded to this traditional authority, means Khomeini, and joined men in the street demonstrations. In the 19th century, a cleric like Khomeini would never ask women to go to the street to demonstrate, even with veil. So if Khomeini called traditional women to go to demonstrations, his aim was eventually to outweigh the modernist women who were present in the demonstrations and in the movement against the Shah. There was even more than that. Most unveiled women participating in the revolution were leftist, they had a modern reading of Islam. These leftist women, or enlightened women, played an important role in the movement that led to the fall of the Shah. They were young and energetic, and Khomeini saw them as a threat to his own newly established Islamic regime. By forcing them to veil or to stay away from the rallies, in fact, he wanted to eliminate their power. At the same time, he aimed to eliminate the liberal and secular forces that legitimately claimed to take part in the government. The women who wore chador, or on the other hand, symbolized the authority of the clerics. Calling women to participate in the revolution pursued two distinct aims. The first was to allow women to work, because in the modern period and the rise of middle class, many traditional women secluded at home and could not respond to the modern requirement of being active and independent. In such a society, women represent an important workforce. Traditional women might refrain to go to study or work away from their family. But after the revolution, this style of life was sanctioned by religion. Under the clerical authority, these women and their conservative families were persuaded that women should socialize, but under veil rather than unveiled. The other aim of Khomeini was purely ideological and political. Women have always been used by political power. Reza Shah's symbol of modernization was to unveil women, and Khomeini's symbol of Islamic government was to force women to veil. Veiled woman on the street indicates that clerical authority is present there. The clerics, on the other hand, did their best to impose chador, but many young women resisted and wore rather light scarf, that is what they do now, in order to pay a lip service to the rules. So we can call, to some extent, the use of light scarf as Islamic unveiling. Therefore, allowing traditional and religiously conservative women to go out for study or work away from the control of their family had practical and socio-economic rationales. All this has resulted in a new gender relationship in Iran under the clerical regime, which is very important. That is what I call a fundamental change and fundamental modernization of social life under the clerical regime. Whilst under the Shah, under the Pahlavi regime, even amongst the so-called westernized or modern families, male-female relationship beyond marriage was very limited. Under the clerics, this has fundamentally evolved, and we find many unmarried couples in Iran today. This new gender relations that respond to modern economic conditions is backed up by religion. First of all, veil is an indication that veiled women are protected by religion. And as they respect the rules of Sharia, they are not blamed for socializing with men. Secondly, in Islam, temporary marriage is allowed. If a male and female couple wanted to live together without going through customary marriage procedure, they recite a religious legal formula that is called sira. And sira in Arabic means formula, in fact. And they become legally allowed to behave as a boyfriend-girlfriend, a term that was not morally accepted before the revolution in Iran. This is very easy, simple, and no need of civil and legal registration or long-term commitment. This temporary marriage can be 1 hour, 1 day, 3 days, 1 week, 1 month, or more. At the end of the duration of the contract, no legal obligation is required from the partners. The religious formula is now allowing even prostitution. Although it is not called so, in the aftermath of the revolution, the Tehran prostitute quarter was bulldozed, burned, and many prostitutes were executed. Now prostitutes can do their job, as it is presumed that they recite the Sira formula before doing their prostitution, selling their body. We can thus say that prostitution is now sanctioned by Sira. In other words, a free relationship between male and female is now legalized through religion. To conclude, I would say that Sira is in fact helping the transition from the old regime of gender relations, where sexual relationship between beyond marriage was a taboo or prohibited, to a new regime where relationship between unmarried boys and girls will become gradually an accepted norm. Therefore, we see that in the post-revolutionary Iran, unmarried girls who in the past could not leave their family before marriage to work and study for far away from their parents' home, they can now live independently. One of the major fallout of this fundamental change is that, similar to many other modern societies, age of marriage has increased, divorce is on the rise in Iran, birth rate and fertility decline, and families have less children. And as a result, the population pyramid, with 70% of below 30 years old at the beginning of the revolution is gradually being reverted. Thank you for listening.